From the lowest to the highest, from the furthest to the nearest, from the smallest of the smallest to the greatest of the greatest, yoga is about all of life, everything we do, all of existence. My name's James Bogue. Welcome to the Whole Life Yoga Podcast.
Hello there,
My
Phil.
friend,
Good to see you.
good to see you again, my friend. Always good to see you, my friend. Good.
Yeah. Well, following our previous conversation, Bill, in that conversation, you mentioned 3 books that you encountered in your adolescence that really made a huge impact in your life and have stayed with you in the decades since. The William James Varieties of Religious Experience, Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and then the one about man being at war with himself. Yeah.
Man Against Himself
Man
by
Against.
Dr. Carl. Yeah. Man
Yeah.
Against Himself by Dr. Carl Menninger, Topeka, Kansas.
Yes.
Another Kansan. Yeah.
And then when you were referencing those books, you mentioned how from a pretty early age, you became very conscious of the way that we humans sometimes fight against ourselves or spend or deplete or even perhaps waste so much life energy in self-sabotage and even self-destruction. And obviously this internal conflict and the possibility of sinking oneself or lifting oneself up, this is a key theme in the Bhagavad Gita. But one thing that really struck me, I remember you mentioning in the previous conversation, Bill, that even as a young man, as an adolescent in a small town in Kansas,
13 years old.
yeah, you saw people, as it were, kind of capitulating on the battlefield of life or being overwhelmed on the battlefield of life and then losing themselves to things like substance abuse or gambling. And you also mentioned, Bill, getting into the wrong marriage. And
Right.
this is what I would like to ask you about, because when I was teaching at Chulalongkorn University alongside you, I know for myself and so many of the students would find it so inspiring the way you spoke about your marriage and your beautiful wife. So it seems to me, Bill, that those pitfalls that you saw with such alarm as a teenager of losing oneself to addiction or to the wrong type of relationship, you seem to have done a pretty good job of avoiding those things. And rather than get into the wrong marriage, you seem to have got into the perfect marriage. So I would like to ask you, Bill, as somebody who has been with Dana for so many years.
45 years now.
How many?
45 years.
Yeah. So the
July the 27th, this coming July, next month, July 27th, it's been 45 years.
Wow. Well, congratulations, Bill. So I'd like to ask you about that. And there's one other kind of related aspect that I've just mentioned it now, and then I'll leave it to you. But you also mentioned last time, when entering another culture, one does well to do so alone. Because,
Yes.
And yet, when one develops the type of intimate relationship that a great marriage can be, it seems to me that perhaps one also creates a common culture and there is a shared support. So I'd just like to ask you about your experience of choosing the right marriage and what that means for you and has meant for you in terms of your path.
Well, one of the things that you just did, James, that I think is very important for our friends that are watching this, is to understand when I was 13 and I read the book and I discussed it with my mother for many, many years. But I mean, we discussed this with my mother because my mother loved these books too. But when I watched this, and I was in my small town in Kansas, and I was watching people in these horrible marriages and these, very unhappy people. They were very unhappy people. And the book, Man Against Himself, I want you to understand this, James, it terrified me. I mean, I was terrified by this experiencing of all the ways that we can slowly, as Dr. Menninger points out, slowly commit suicide. Now, this point is the one that was what terrified me, because I could see this with my own eyes. And then I could discuss it with my mother and watching several relationships and things like this and look at them. And I do not want to end up this way.
Mm.
And so all throughout my life, I've been very, very afraid. And it's caused me a great deal of meditation, but it's also caused me to go and ask other people that I respected, about, how to live life, how to save money, how to do things. And so it's made me want to talk to other people about their advice, people I respect who are successful. And so I think this is a legitimate fear. And I think in the Bhagavad Gita, it's perfectly okay to have this kind of fear, because it will move us along a proper path of inquiry to where we can get more knowledge to solve the kinds of things that we're going to face in both the transcendental world and also in the normal world that we all live in, what we call samsara.
Yeah.
So now, on a spiritual level, we know the world that we live in and also the transcendental world are the same. Yeah. But in reality, because we live in duality and because we're not enlightened, we also live in samsara. So we have to know, how do we swim in the ocean of the world that we are living in?
Yes.
How do we do that? Okay. So this is one thing. The book absolutely terrified me. I want our friends to understand that. And so when I went into the Marine Corps, and when I went and marriage was a big deal, because when I first met my wife, you see, I walked in to the office. I was going to study Chinese with my wife's boss. My wife's boss at that time was a Chinese manager, and he was teaching me Mandarin. So I walked into his office to study Mandarin Chinese. And then I saw this obviously Chinese lady, and I took one look at her, and it was, wow, I'm going to marry her. Now, understand this. I was 35 years old at the time. I had absolutely no desire to get married whatsoever. I was living in Bangkok, Thailand, which has a tremendous nightlife, which I will not go into any details on, but it has a marvelous nightlife, which I enjoyed thoroughly, all aspects of it. And I did not want to get married, but I took one look at that, my wife. Okay, I'm going to marry her. I didn't even know her name. I just took one look at her, and my intuition told me, this is the woman you need to marry. And I always obey my intuition.
Yeah.
My intuition saved my life in combat, and I always listen to it. So then the hard work began, because I mean, I don't know whether you want to, how much detail you want to go into, but I mean, it was just hell, persuading my wife to marry me, because she's very Chinese. I mean, her father was born and raised in China. Her mother was born and raised in China. Her elder brother was born in China. Dana, my wife's name is Dana, and she was the first member of her family born in Thailand. Her older brother was born in China. I mean, her father was a Chinese businessman from Siang Kong. Siang Kong in Chinatown in Bangkok is noted for tough business people, and they worship only one thing: money. And of course, as a military guy, I'm just a total loser. I mean, I'm just a total loser, because I'll never make any money. You can't make any money as a soldier. You're a loser. You're you're basically somebody that sucks the public tit. You know, you don't make any money on your own, you know, so you'll never make any money. So what good are you? So that's the culture that I wanted to marry into. And they don't respect anything except money and work and how to make money. I mean, my father-in-law would have more respect for a noodle vendor than he would for, you know, a Marine, you know, because at least a noodle vendor has an opportunity to make money. He can make more noodles, get a franchise. He could, you know, he could move out, you know, kind of thing. But, you know, not me, you know, that kind of thing. So it was a rough go. So it was a very unusual experience. But one thing I learned along, and this goes along with the idea of you have to do things on your own. You have to learn how to do things on your own. When I was in the Black church, I was all by myself.
Yeah.
And I learned that it's better to go into a culture by yourself because there's nobody to depend on. You have to figure it out on your own. And you have to figure it out with the people that you're dealing with, that you're living with. You have to go to them for advice. So I found, so it's like that. You have to go to those people, and they will teach you. If you can find somebody that likes you, they'll teach you what you need to know. And it's objective. It's not subjective. When I was in the Black church, when I went into the Black church, they didn't care about my white boy values. I was in their world, and I would do things their way, not my way. In this world, there is no I, me, or my. They don't care. For example, when I went into the Black church, I mentioned before, I was so embarrassed. I have a horrible voice, croaking. I mean, I was so embarrassed, but everybody had to sing a song. If you joined the choir, I was a member of 2 choirs, you had to sing a song. And you had to, that was the rule. So they didn't care about my embarrassment. You will sing a song. And my song was Heaven So High.
Yeah.
I had to sing that, croaking or not croaking. That was my song, and I sang it, you know, in church services. So you enter that world, and they don't care about the world because you're a guest in their world. And you will learn their rules, and you'll learn how to do things their way. So, for example, after I met my wife, I mean, my wife had absolutely no desire to marry outside of her own culture at all. I mean, she came from a good family and a good Chinese family, and she was making money. Actually, she had a lot more money than I did, you know, but it's so I did things to a certain degree. You have to always be who you are. That's another secret about entering a different culture. In the Black culture and the Black church that I was in, I would never be Black. You don't change the color of your skin. I would never be Black, but I was a guest in Black church. And as a guest, I would do everything my host would see as appropriate to do, but I would not be Black. I would not act Black. I would not speak Black because I was a white boy. Same thing when I entered Chinese culture with my wife. I knew this was going to be a really, really tough. It was going to be really, really tough. So the first thing I did was I invited my wife for lunch. And lunch in Bangkok at that time, 1976, was acceptable because lunch could always be for business. So in other words, a nice Chinese girl could have lunch with a with a white guy, it would be okay because it could be seen as lunch. You know, in business, it could be seen as doing some business or something like that. So I invited her for lunch, and then later I think the second or third date, I invited her for dinner, and then dinner's okay too. And then about the third time I met her, I told her that I'm pretty sure we're going to get married. And of course, that really, really freaked her out. I mean, it really did. But again, I'm a Farang, I'm a foreigner, I'm a Westerner, and I'm an American. And Americans are very direct speaking people. At least in my generation, we were. We were very, very straight out. So I didn't approach her with anything hidden or try to play any games. I was just straight out saying, I think we're going to get married. As a matter of fact, I'm sure we're going to get married. And I knew what the answer would be. And I mean, I got blasted. I mean, just blasted. I won't go into the language that she used, you know, on me or anything like that. And then she wouldn't speak to me for 8 months. About 8 months, she wouldn't even speak to me. I'd go to the Office of Study Chinese, and she would just ignore me. You know, I'd say hello, and she'd just ignore me, you know, kind of thing. But after 8 months, then again, we went out for lunch again. And then I said, where are we going to go on our honeymoon? And then she wouldn't speak to me again for about 5 months. See, but all along, you know, from the first time we met, I listened in her diatribe against me. I listened very carefully to what she was saying. Is like, I could never marry somebody like you. You would never understand my culture. You don't understand my language. You don't understand. You could never speak to my father. And she went on and on about her father many, many times. You could never adapt to my family. My family is pure Chinese. She said that you could never adapt to my family. So on and on and on. I'm sitting there. So I was thinking, okay, language. I've got to learn how to speak Teochew Chinese. Now, the fact that I spoke Mandarin Chinese pretty well didn't cut the mustard at all, because that's not her father's dialect. Totally different language.
Yeah.
So I went and found a great teacher. As a matter of fact, her name was Eleanor Dawson, and she was the wife of a newspaper correspondent. She was Vietnamese, and she was Teochew Chinese, born in Vietnam. So we could communicate in Vietnamese, and her English was outstanding. Her English was very, very, very good. So we could communicate in Vietnamese, we could communicate in English, and then, but she just flat told me when she found out, you know, where this girl was from. She said, look, I want to save you some money. This girl's never going to marry you. You know, and I mean, she's never going to marry you. You know, she comes from a high-class Chinese family in Chinatown. She's not going to marry, you know, white trash like you. You know, so I mean, it's like, you know, I said, well, look, she said, I don't want to take your money. I said, take my money because you're a good teacher. And she said, okay, I will, but understand this, you know, you've got no real chance of marrying this girl. So I studied Chinese 3 years, but after the first 8 months, okay, no speaking, and then lunch, and then after that another 5 months of no speaking, and then I wouldn't give up, and I started calling her, and she talked to me in the evenings, and then we started going out and kind of dating, lunch, stuff like that, and then after 3 years, I passed the language test, and she married me.
So when you say pass the language test, Bill, what did that look like? What that you were able to...
It was like it took me 3 years, but I got to a level that's okay. You can communicate with my father now. So okay, so we did. It was very interesting. One of the things that's very interesting that may interest our friends that are watching this is on the day I got married, I'm not even sure my wife liked me. I mean, there's no talk of love. There's none of this lovey-dovey stuff in Chinese society. I mean, it's not. I mean, they don't go for this "I love you truly" stuff. It's the day we got married. I'm not sure that my wife even liked me, but I knew one thing. I knew she respected me, and that is the important thing in a Chinese, for Chinese. I knew she respected me. And later when we began to talk more openly about, what had happened kind of thing, she told me, she said, I never met anybody that tried so hard for anything. She said, I watched you. She said, I never saw anybody try so hard to do something. Mm. And so it was respect. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I wasn't even sure the day we got married whether my wife even liked me or not. Mm. But like I say, I knew she respected me. And that's more important if we're Chinese. Mm-hmm. But we even after 45 years of marriage, we don't go into this "I love you truly" stuff. I mean, and cuddly and go goo goo language and all that kind of thing. I mean, this is we just don't do that. The way I know my wife loves me is this: I had 7,000 books and 4,000 DVDs, and we moved into our condominium. My wife instinctively put everything into a library. She had libraries all over our condominium for my books and my DVDs because they were important to me. Mm. And she knew I loved them. So she takes care of me. She takes marvelous, marvelous, marvelous care of me. And we have in our old age now, I'm pushing 83 now, and she's pushing 77. And we have a remarkably close relationship. We agree on everything. We're together all the time. We love being in each other's company. That kind of thing. My wife is my very, very dearest companion and friend. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think I'm hers. Mm. That's the nature of our relationship now. Yeah. Do you have any more questions? I mean, have I covered everything, or is there anything you want to go about going alone into this?
Yeah.
I think you have to go alone because you have to take responsibility for what's coming down the line. You can't depend on anybody. Mm. It's better to do it on your own. Make your own mistakes. Live with your mistakes. Correct them and move on. Mm. Because that way you take responsibility for what you're doing, and you'll learn. Mm. You'll learn from the whipping you take. And I took a lot of whippings, but you'll learn, and then you can move on. But you can always improve. You're always improving. You're always moving on. You're getting deeper and deeper into the culture. Mm. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a couple more questions or reflections, Bill, and it really comes back to the Gita. And so you mentioned we can feel this fear as a human being, and it's altogether normal and natural that one feels fear in the face of reality. And this is very much mapped out in the yoga teachings. And then the opportunity that yoga teachings highlight is that, well, if we then make the proper inquiry, we can expand our awareness, we can expand our knowledge, and we can develop tools to then learn to swim in the ocean of existence and actually enjoy it. But it seems to me, Bill, that one thing I notice through the course of our conversations, and I don't just mean the ones we've recorded, but also going back since we first met in the early 2000s. In the Bhagavad Gita, one way that when I'm working with groups on the text, one thing that is always one of the main things that comes up is this idea that we have an internal pilot. We have this inner light of conscience. As a human being, it's one of our distinguishing characteristics.
Right.
So there's this deep intuitive wisdom, intelligence, intuition. And it seems to me, Bill, you are a person whose connection to conscience, or whose connection to this pilot light of internal guidance, you've never become too estranged from that. So when you recount the experience of, as a 15-year-old boy, walking past the church, the music grabs you. I could imagine some people, they would feel the pull, but they would also, the weight of conditioning was, oh, I shouldn't be going there. And they would resist the call of the intuitive desire. Similarly, in combat, you're in a situation where there's so many different forces or influences pulling on your awareness. But when the intuitive wisdom gives you a message, you were tuned into that enough to heed it, and then it saved your life, as you've shared. And then you see Dana, and as you just laid out, in the most unlikeliest of situations, you say, this is the woman I'm going to marry. And you're a man who has no thoughts of marriage, but you're able to hear that voice, which is telling you something which goes against the grain, goes against the inertia of all your established habits, but still you were able to hear it. And I think this is so helpful on a spiritual path. Is like, can we tune in more keenly to that ever-present voice of deep internal wisdom? And I wonder, Bill, if you have any particular ideas or suggestions about how a person can rehabilitate or more finely attune the connection to that internal wisdom or that internal intuition, and how one can integrate that intuitive call with a pragmatic approach to life.
One of the things this is very difficult, but one of the things I think in the book, Man Against Himself, and one of the things that we have to be aware of is this. Some of us have a very strong tendency to want to do something that is very pro-life. But many of us have also that instinct for death, to kill ourselves and the people around us. You can take a look at human nature. Some people are intuitively good and you want to be around these people. Other people, frankly, are evil. And they are self-destructive, and they'll bring about your destructive too. They're your destruction too. You have to be aware of this. So you have to examine yourself. What kind of person are you? I learned a long time ago when I was just a little tiny boy. I can't even recall. I mean, my earliest memories are that all my intuitions were good for me. I never had any bad. Other people are not so lucky. So the thing of it is, I don't think we can make a general rule about this because our karma is just simply too different. So I don't think we can make a generality out of this. I really don't. Each person has to examine themselves and examine, are their internal self, and maybe this self is just not consciousness, but it can go back to the Atman. It can go back to the real self, the true self. Is this a force? The true self, of course, would be a force for good, but what is the nature of the consciousness that is guiding us? Is it good or is it not good? We have to make that, and we can only do that through awareness.
Yes.
Awareness of the consequences that we've had and we've suffered, kind of thing. So I don't think we can make a generality on this, James. I think each person has to examine themselves on this one. Does that make sense to you?
It does, Bill. That's what the Mahabharata and the Gita, that's what it really invites us to recognize. And for me, this is, yoga begins when we each acknowledge, I'm not in a state of yoga. I'm not in a cohesive, balanced, or let's say finely balanced, integrated state as I could be. And perhaps I have something to do with that. And I could do something about it. I could bring myself into a deeper, subtler harmony and equipoise. And in that deeper harmony, I will gain much greater insight than perhaps I have up to now. And what that will mean is I will see where I have been sinking myself, getting in my own way, self-sabotaging, and causing harm in the space and relationships around me as well.
Exactly.
And one of the things I do feel some frustration around, I just feel that the way that so many people never get invited into this process of self-examination, like mainstream education in some instances, almost ushers people away from that deeper inquiry. And then when death comes knocking, as it inevitably will, a loved one dies, or one has an accident, or something happens. And when the reality of life, because there's no life without death, so when the reality of life and death comes into our awareness in a more, let's say, a way that can no longer be ignored, for so many people, we prefer to just, oh no, I'm just not going to look at that. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. And so there is this dis-ease inside.
Right. Good. I like that. I like the way you put that.
Yeah.
This ease.
Yeah.
The suffering.
Yeah. And so the path of yoga and of spiritual wisdom traditions from all over the world is, well, this is the reality of life. Let's wrestle with it. Let's play with it. Let's dance with it. We don't have to be overwhelmed by it. We don't have to be its pawns or its victims. We can actually work with it in a constructive way, like you were suggesting, Bill. It's like the appropriate response to fear is a deeper inquiry, because we have tools of inquiry as human beings. And when we use our capacities as humans, we can expand our awareness, and then we can learn to swim in this ocean of samsara. We don't have to see.
Let me give another example. When I was in Hawaii going to school, I was actually a fairly good swimmer, but I remember going out to Makapu Beach with a good friend of mine, Paul Bernicke, and I looked at the waves there, and I thought, oh God, I'd never go out in that, kind of thing. Yeah. And my friend Paul looked at me and he says, I'm going to teach you how to body surf. He said, I brought you out here because I'm going to teach you how to body surf. You're going to surf. I'm going to teach you how to body surf on top of those waves. and I went, not me or not, kind of thing, because I was scared. I mean, I was really, really scared.
Yeah.
Because you could drown. I mean, you can get killed doing that stuff, very easily. And so my friend looked at me and he said, do you trust me? Now, my friend Paul was one of the strongest men I've ever seen in my life. And he swam like a seal in water. I mean, he was just like a seal in water. I mean, he could just swim like a seal. Yeah. He said, do you trust me? And he said, I will go out there, and do you trust me to be able to, I will save you. If you get into any trouble, he said, I will take care of you. He said, do you have confidence in me that I will do that for you? And I looked at him and I said, yes, I do. She said, so let's go. And so I learned how to body surf. Yeah, it was a tremendous experience. But see, again, fear, but I met a teacher.
Mm.
And my teacher, I had total confidence in my teacher that yes, I knew if I got in trouble out in those waves, he was so strong that I knew he could save my life. I knew he would save my life.
Mm.
So there was nothing for me to worry about
Yeah.
because I had total confidence in my teacher.
Yeah.
And so with him, he taught me everything that he could. And then we had marvelous times after that. And I loved to body surf.
Yeah.
And then occasionally, once in a while, I got caught in a current, and it would take me out way, way out. But my friend had taught me how to relax. When the current gets you, he said, let it go. You don't fight it. Go with it. Because if you fight it, you lose your energy and you'll die because it'll kill you. So go with the flow, wait till it goes out, dissipates. One time I got so far off I could barely see the land. And then I had to swim all the way back, but I was able to do it, not a problem, because what my teacher had taught me.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah.
So we can learn how to swim in life.
Mm.
We can learn how to swim. We have to find teachers.
Yes.
We have to find teachers that can help us do this because you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
I have never gone any place alone. I've always had teachers.
Yeah.
When I was in my Black church, I had teachers that helped me adapt. When I was in the ocean, I had my teacher to help me. When I was in philosophy, I had 7 teachers to help me.
Mm.
Sanskrit, you and I had the same master.
Yes.
Who did it for us.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So that's the way you proceed. You don't do this on your own.
Mm.
Can't do it on your own. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
You have to find the teacher, but you have to be a good student and you have to make the effort.
You're just distilling so many of the core teachings of yoga, Bill, like this idea, we have to have that self-trust, that self-confidence to keep making a heartful, engaged, constant, steady effort with our eyes, ears open, all our faculties engaged.
And the teacher will help you with that.
Yeah.
The teacher will help you with that. But you have to have it on your own. You have to have the basic drive.
Mm.
You have to have the basic drive for it. And then you have the teacher that will help you. And you have to find the right teacher because there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of charlatans in this game.
Oh. Yeah.
There's a lot of bad people in this game.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I'd like to ask you a bit more about, Bill. Sure. One reflection, one question, and one, like, when you mentioned the importance of entering another culture or a new sphere of inquiry as a guest, and as you recounted this series of experiences going into the Black church, going into the Thai Chinese business culture, going as a guest, but remaining authentically yourself with this openness to learn, it seems to me, one perspective that sometimes we might encounter in spiritual teachings is the idea that everything that comes to us as a human being is a gift. We are a guest in this theater of existence, in this realm of life. And so the attitude that you describe, Bill, seems to me, even if a person never leaves the province of their birth, this attitude of being a privileged guest, it's such a privilege to have this opportunity of being a human being, of being alive. And the correspondence between this attitude of, yes, let me tread respectfully here with my faculties open. There seems to be a big overlap between the attitude of apprenticeship and studentship and being a patra, that the cup that is open to receive the blessings that existence might be able to pour forth, if we are only open to them. And it seems to me, Bill, you've had the blessing of encountering many great teachers during your life, but it also seems that that was precipitated or facilitated by your own orientation and your own attitude and your own hard work. So would you have anything to add on this kind of the overlap between the attitude of being a guest, being a seeker, and being a student, and maintaining, deepening, and cultivating this attitude of apprenticeship?
Well, one of the things I think my attitude has always been that as a guest, one of the things that you have to be aware of is you have to kill your own ego. It's not I, me, or my anymore. Okay? In other words, when I entered my Chinese family, by the way, my father-in-law and I, we developed a great, great love for each other. Now, my father-in-law was one of the toughest Chinese businessmen I have ever seen in my life. I mean, he was tough and mean, but he loved me and I loved him. And we had a 25-year conversation on China, and he was brilliant. I mean, the way he saw things was just incredible. I had a marvelous relationship with him. And everybody in our family knew it. Now, my wife, Dana, has 8 brothers and sisters, but it was well understood by everybody in the family that my father-in-law actually loved me more than he did his own children. And they accepted that because I was the one that would talk to him in Chinese and Teochew Chinese about China and about his life. Nobody else cared. But I wanted to know all the aspects of his life, what he'd lived when he was in China, the way he thought. And he understood that I wanted to get into his mind, his Chinese mind, because I want to learn how Chinese think. And he understood that perfectly.
Yeah.
And he loved it. He loved it. And so we had a 25-year conversation together before he passed away. And it was a marvelous experience. It was one of the truly great experiences of my life. I mean, really, I've told my wife many times, I've told Dana many times that I am so happy I married her because I was able to meet her father. And her father became more of a father to me than my own blood father was. By a lot. He really cared about my education. He really did his best to make me Chinese, even though he knew that would be impossible. But he did his best. I mean, he really worked at it. So it was a marvelous thing. But to get back to your question about guests, I think the big thing that a lot of people fail to understand is this. They go to a place and they carry with them their own morality, their own ego, their own culture, their own everything. And then they throw that out there and they say, hey, wait a minute, you guys aren't playing by my rules.
Yes.
Now we have seen this happen, for example, at our university, Chulalongkorn University. I mean, you and I have seen foreigners go completely crazy there. I mean, literally crazy, because they did that, and it doesn't work.
Yes.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's and again, it goes back to man against himself. When you take your own ego, worship it, throw it out there in another culture, say this is the reality when it's not.
Yeah.
You're living in a world of complete delusion.
Yes.
You will not be successful.
Yeah.
You And chances are you may end up going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You and I have seen this with our own eyes.
Yeah. No, it makes me. I remember. So when I graduated in French and Italian, and I then went to work in Japan
Mhm.
on it was called the JET program, and it's a big Japanese government-sponsored program. People,
Mhm.
native English speakers, teaching English in Japanese schools, and I realized at the time I was very fortunate on the program, but in hindsight, by the time I then moved to Thailand, I realized how fortunate I had been to have that experience, because one thing that was really pressed upon us from the beginning before we even went to Japan was we were going to be entering another culture,
Mhm.
and it was not right or wrong. It was different. And this message was emphasized again and again. And I remember straight away, I started having experiences where I realized things that I would reflexively do were wrong in Japanese society.
Right.
And being the only person in the whole room who thought that something was right or something was wrong. But having a container and let's say, a support system around me to recognize, no, this is part of the whole experience. This is what you're here to learn. You're here to invite people to encounter another culture, but as a guest. And as a guest, as you suggested, was like, throw your own preconceptions to one side as best you possibly can and walk, in a sense, innocently in this new realm and see what you can learn from it. And the thing that, in Japan, some things just work in such, for a person who grew up in the United Kingdom, where, for example,
Right.
public transport and infrastructure is woeful, to go to a place where things worked so well. It's like, wow,
Mhm.
we can learn so much from this
Mhm.
situation. But then when I lived in Thailand, I was very keenly aware how helpful that formation, let's say, in navigating a really different culture in Japan had been, because Thailand was different again.
Oh yeah.
But I'd had that training in
Mhm.
this is the
Mhm.
principle of how to enter another culture.
Right. Right.
Expect it to line up with your preconceived notions of what is right or wrong, and be ready to have quite disturbing experiences. I remember having my expectations dashed on
Right.
many times, but because I'd been told this is normal, I was able to digest it much more readily than if I hadn't been primed for it.
Right.
And what would you say, was it your experience in the Black Church, Bill, that really gave you the experiential understanding of that? Was that the first thing, or was there something even earlier in your life that allowed you to then, with open arms, embrace these opportunities to kill the ego, at least to some small degree, and open yourself to learn something new?
I think the Black church was the first big experience I had
Yeah.
with that, because it was a different world in many ways than the one I grew up with. I mean, as a white boy, growing up in the culture I grew up in, kind of thing. It was a quite different culture in many
Yeah.
ways. But again, I never felt uncomfortable.
Mm.
I never really felt uncomfortable, because one of the things is, intuitively I understood I'm a guest.
Mm.
And my mother had always taught me a guest always obeys the rules of the house they're visiting.
Yes.
I mean, that came with from the time that I was, I was learning how to talk.
Mm.
My mother was teaching me that.
Mm.
When you're a guest, you always follow the rules of the house you're visiting.
Yeah.
If you can't do that, then leave.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, and I think that's how, when you say that, Bill, it brings me back to the Gita and the teachings of yoga, which, as I understand them, are really. Like one of my teachers said, there is a manual for a human life, and it's called the Yoga Shastra. And if one
Right.
apprentices oneself to it, then one can learn how to live skillfully in this house of a human
Right.
incarnation. Yeah. In this,
It's so practical. I mean, to me, the Bhagavad Gita is so practical in so many ways. I mean, it's just very, very, very practical.
yeah.
It's a very practical work. It really, truly is. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'd like to ask you about next time, Bill. Then my next question is, I think it will take us, let's say, even more overtly back into the Gita. For today, I'm conscious of the time, Bill. So is there anything that you would like to add before we close for today?
No, I think we really covered a lot of very, frankly speaking, very practical
Yes.
and very important points.
Yeah.
To me, it's just common sense
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. But
For sure.
but common sense is not so common sometimes, you know.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I don't know.
And it's good to be reminded. That's what the Gita, like sometimes people tell me, Krishna is saying the same thing in chapter 6. He's already told us this for the previous 5 chapters. And then one of my other friends in the class was said, have you got it yet? And then the guy's like, no. That's why he keeps repeating it, because it's easy to forget.
Exactly. No, it is. And the thing of it is, as teachers, we understand repetition in different forms is a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
We repeat, we repeat, we repeat. Maybe in different ways, but we always go back over the same things.
Mm.
There are certain universalities,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So there we go.
Mm.
Yeah. What a wonderful time.
Thank you so much, Bill. I look forward to
I had a marvelous time. Thank you
Good.
very much, my friend. I had a great time.
Thank you for sharing with us, Bill. It's a real privilege to hear these wonderfully inspiring stories, and I look forward to more.
Take care, my friend. Take care for now.
Bye
Take
for
care
now.
now.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now. Bye-bye.